The sun had barely begun to rise over the barren plains of Draxil 9 when Elias Rowan tightened the straps on his worn field medic pack and glanced across the horizon. The distant mountains of black stone shimmered with the heat of the morning sun, a cruel reminder that beauty could exist even in a place designed for war. He had been stationed here for months, a small human contingent sent to observe the border of Keller Dominion space. Most days, nothing happened. Most days, he wished something would. He was hunched over a data pad when the first alarm sounded, a shrill, piercing noise that made his teeth ache. The station shook as if the world itself had shuddered. "Red alert!" someone yelled. "Enemy contact." He had trained for this moment 1,000 times in simulations, but training was nothing compared to the reality of screaming engines and the smell of scorched metal. He reached the edge of the clearing where the human and Keller forces clashed. Smoke curled like dark snakes through the sky. Bodies, human and alien alike, were strewn across the rocky terrain. He ignored the fear twisting his stomach. There were people to save, and then he saw her. A small figure, barely more than a child, crawled from the wreckage of a silver escape pod. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, a subtle glow that marked her as different. Elias froze, heart hammering. The Keller markings on her uniform were unmistakable. She was royalty. He had seen the reports, the lists of heirs and highborns, but he didn't have time to think. Her left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, her small arms covered in blood, and her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. Without hesitation, Elias ran to her side. "Hey," he said softly, though the shouting and gunfire made his voice barely audible. "I've got you. You're going to be okay. Can you move?" She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile, yet her eyes, large, deep, and strangely knowing, seemed to pierce straight through him. He didn't know if it was fear, pain, or something else, but it made his stomach tighten. Gunfire cracked behind him. He glanced back and realized the retreat had already begun. The human troops were pulling away, leaving small pockets of chaos in their path. He adjusted his grip and started running toward the trees on the ridge, hoping the smoke and distance would hide him. Every step made him aware of her broken leg, of the blood seeping through his makeshift bandage, and of the pounding in his own chest. Somewhere along the way, he remembered the training: keep calm, stay focused, improvise, but instinct had taken over. He didn't think about rank, duty, or consequences. He only thought about getting her alive. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless in the blur of smoke and screams, before he finally found a secluded cave hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks. He gently laid her down on the smooth stone floor and began cleaning her wounds with whatever supplies he had left. The child whimpered, curling into herself, and he murmured reassurances, though he doubted she could understand his language fully. Her breathing was shallow, and he could feel her small body trembling. He worked quickly, bandaging her injuries, applying antiseptic, and improvising a splint from a broken branch. Each movement was precise, practiced, yet his hands shook. He had saved lives before many times, but never a life like this. So young, so important, and yet so utterly dependent on him. Night fell, and the cave grew cold. Elias wrapped the child in his jacket, keeping her close to conserve warmth. He sat beside her, listening to the distant rumble of retreating ships and the occasional flare of laser fire. He didn't know if the Dominion would come looking for her, if humans would return, or if he would survive the night. He only knew that she had to live. The child finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you help me?" "Because it's right." The next morning, Elias realized he couldn't stay in the cave forever. Supplies were running low, and enemy patrols would soon scour the area. He had to move her, had to find somewhere safe until the fighting stopped. With careful planning, he lifted her again, securing her with his jacket and preparing for a long trek across the rocky terrain. He avoided patrols, ducked behind ridges, and used the smoke from distant fires to mask their movement. Each step was a gamble. The child moaned in pain, and Elias whispered encouragements. He remembered fragments of old survival manuals, tips from experienced soldiers, lessons from his instructors. Every trick, every piece of knowledge mattered now. When they finally reached a small outpost abandoned by retreating forces, Elias let out a sigh he didn't know he had been holding. The building was partially destroyed, but it offered shelter from the wind and the sun. He laid the child down and began treating her injuries again, using the last of his supplies. As he worked, he realized something that both frightened and humbled him. This child's survival was entirely his responsibility. If he failed, an entire lineage of future would vanish. He had saved countless soldiers before, but none carried the weight of an empire. The child's eyes fluttered, closed, exhaustion overcoming pain. Elias sat back, exhausted himself, and allowed himself a moment to breathe. He thought of home, of quiet nights without war, of days when his biggest problem was paperwork or broken equipment. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was keeping her alive, one moment at a time. Days passed. Elias scavenged what he could from the abandoned outpost, hunted small game, and found fresh water from a nearby stream. Each night, he wrapped the child in his jacket, speaking softly to her even when she slept. She began to trust him, leaning on him for support and comfort, though she said little. In her silence, Elias learned patience, a quiet determination, and a respect for the fragility of life. He thought often about the larger war, about the humans and Keller soldiers clashing beyond the ridges, but he didn't allow himself to dwell. There was nothing he could do about it except survive and protect the child. It became a simple, unwavering purpose: keep her safe, no matter the cost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Elias sat beside the child and let his thoughts wander. He didn't know if he would ever see her again after this war, if she would remember him, or if anyone would ever understand what he had done. And yet, he felt a quiet certainty. Some actions mattered more than recognition, more than glory. Some actions were simply the right thing to do. The wind howled through the broken walls of the outpost, carrying with it the distant echoes of battle. Elias tightened his grip on the child, whispering promises he didn't know he could keep. "I'll get you through this. I swear." Not because of skill, not because of luck, but because he had chosen to act when others might have looked away. That choice, small and unnoticed, had set in motion a future neither of them could yet imagine. He stood outside the outpost one last time, looking down at her sleeping form. His hands were scarred, his clothes torn, his mind exhausted, but his heart was steady. He would leave now, disappear into the chaos of retreating forces, and never speak of what had happened. She would survive. That was enough. And as Elias disappeared into the rising sun, moving silently across the plains toward human lines, the child stirred, her small hand reaching out as if to grasp something she couldn't yet name. Somewhere deep inside, she carried a memory she wouldn't fully understand until many years later. The act was forgotten by the galaxy, lost among millions of battles and countless lives. But for one human and one alien child, it would matter forever. Years had passed since Elias Rowan saved the small alien child on Draxil 9. The galaxy had shifted in that time. Wars had ended, new borders were drawn, and alliances were made and broken. Elias had left the military after the fighting subsided, tired of constant danger, and had become a civilian engineer stationed on Varlon Station, a remote human outpost on the edge of explored space. Life was quiet, almost painfully ordinary. He spent his days repairing transport ships, maintaining power systems, and occasionally drinking with other engineers who shared similar stories of forgotten battles. He liked the quiet. He liked the routine. He liked being invisible, but nothing stays quiet forever. It began with a whisper in the docking bay. Human and alien traders spoke in low tones about an approaching fleet. Some mentioned the Keller Dominion, the alien empire whose borders had once been flashpoints for human soldiers. Elias didn't pay attention at first. He had heard countless rumors over the years, most of them false alarms. But the whispers grew louder, spreading quickly through the station. The Dominion's fleet was real, massive, and approaching at full speed. The station's sensors picked them up first. Through the viewport in the control room, Elias saw sleek, iridescent ships cutting through space. They moved with precision, disciplined in a way that no human fleet had ever matched. The station's alarms sounded, but it was a quiet alert, not panic. This was a visit, not an attack. Elias felt a strange tightness in his chest. Something about the fleet seemed familiar, though he couldn't place it. He shook his head and returned to his work. There were always fleets passing near Varlon Station, nothing unusual here. By the time the fleet docked, the entire station was abuzz with activity. The airlocks opened, and elegant Keller guards filed in, their armor glinting under the station's lights. The humans tried to keep order, but whispers spread through the corridors. The Queen of the Keller Dominion herself was aboard the fleet. Elias froze mid-step. The Queen? The supreme ruler? It was impossible. Why would the Keller monarch visit a small, quiet human station at the edge of known space? Questions whirled through his mind, but there was no time to ponder. He returned to his station, pretending to adjust wiring while keeping an eye on the new arrivals. Then he saw her. The Queen herself stepped off the lead ship. She was taller than he expected, her presence commanding, yet her movements carried an almost human grace. Her eyes swept over the station, assessing, calculating, and then they landed on him. Elias froze. A chill ran down his spine. She was looking directly at him. Not the crowd, not the engineers bustling around the docking bay. Him. The Queen moved closer, her guards keeping perfect formation behind her. The air around her seemed to hum with authority. She stopped a few feet away and spoke, her voice calm, deliberate, and loud enough to silence the room. "Do you recognize me, human?" His mind raced. Who was she? Every instinct in his body screamed that this was dangerous. He scanned her face, trying to recall a name, a memory, anything that could match the weight of her question. He had no idea. He started, but the Queen raised a hand and the hall fell silent again. The Keller guards shifted slightly, tension radiating from them like a visible force. "Look at my hand," she said. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her sleeve. There on her wrist was a faint scar, almost imperceptible under her smooth, pale skin. Elias' breath caught in his throat. He remembered that scar, the precise location, the way he had carefully stitched it when she was just a child on Draxil 9. His mind reeled. The small alien child he had saved, the one he had risked everything to protect, was her. She had grown into the Queen of the Keller Dominion. His hands trembled slightly as he processed the reality. He had saved the life of an alien queen's daughter, and now she remembered him. "Yes," he whispered, barely audible. I saved you. I have never forgotten." He had not thought about that day in years. He had assumed she would never remember him. The war had moved on, the galaxy had moved on, and he had returned to obscurity. Yet here she was, looking at him with eyes that said everything words could not. "You," the Queen continued, turning to her daughter briefly, "this is the human who saved your life." Elias felt a strange mix of pride and unease. He had never sought recognition. He had done what any human would have done, or so he had thought. But to these aliens, and especially to the Queen, his actions were extraordinary. The Queen's gaze swept over the crowd again. "No one is to touch him. He is under my personal protection. Any threat to this human will be considered an act against the Dominion itself. Your Highness, we were not expecting your arrival. How should we proceed?" Human and alien alike speculated about the implications. The Queen rarely traveled without purpose, and the fact that she had singled out Elias raised questions across the galaxy. Some speculated he was a spy, others a hero, but Elias knew neither title fit. He had simply acted as a human would. Yet now, the weight of that simple action pressed down on him. He had saved a life without thought of reward or recognition, and that act had created ripples that had reached the highest levels of an alien empire. The Queen did not linger in formalities. She moved toward the station's main hall, Elias following hesitantly. Guards flanked him, creating a barrier between him and the rest of the crowd. He could feel the eyes of everyone around him, but he kept his gaze on the Queen. She walked with confidence, yet there was a trace of something else, trust, perhaps, or curiosity. The daughter followed, observing Elias quietly. She spoke finally, her voice soft but clear. "I remember you," she said. "I was so small, and you carried me. I never forgot." Words failed him. I only did what I had to do," he said. "You could have left me," she said. "But you didn't. You chose to help, even when it was dangerous, even when no one else did. That means more than you can imagine." Now he realized that sometimes heroism was simple, the choice to act when action mattered most. For hours, he was led through the station, introduced to Keller officials, and observed by humans and aliens alike. He was treated with the respect of a high-ranking diplomat, yet he felt nothing but the familiar, quiet self-doubt that had always accompanied him. He had not sought this, he reminded himself. He had only acted. That night, as the station settled under the shadow of the alien fleet, Elias stood in the observation deck, staring at the stars. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. "This human is part of our future." He did not know what that meant yet, only that his life had changed forever. The daughter approached him quietly, leaning on the railing. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "All the time," he admitted. "I thought it was just another mission. I never imagined it would matter so much." He wanted to say more, to express the weight of his own gratitude, the strange mixture of fear and awe he felt in the presence of someone he had once saved and who now commanded entire fleets. But no words came. Silence seemed more fitting, a shared understanding beyond language. And for the first time in years, Elias felt truly seen, not for his rank, not for his skill, not for what he had done for humans or soldiers, but for a simple, undeniable act. He had saved a life. He didn't yet know what the future held. He didn't know what the Queen expected of him or how his quiet life would intersect with the fate of an empire. But for now, he allowed himself a small sense of peace. He had done the right thing once, and now the universe had remembered. The station had never felt so crowded. Humans and Keller alike moved through the corridors with cautious precision, some whispering, others staring openly. Every eye seemed to follow Elias wherever he went, a human now at the center of an empire's attention. He walked carefully, trying not to draw too much notice, but it was impossible. The Queen had declared him under her personal protection, and that announcement spread like wildfire. He had thought returning to civilian life on Varlon Station would be simple. Work quietly, fix things, go home to his small quarters, and live in obscurity, but nothing was simple anymore. Alien diplomats approached him with careful bows, speaking in the Keller language. Their words were courteous, almost reverent, yet he understood only fragments. Still, their intent was clear. They wanted to impress him, to gain favor, and perhaps to test the human who had changed the future of the Dominion. He kept moving, adjusting his tools, pretending to focus on maintenance work. But inside, his mind was a storm. Memories of the Draxil 9 mission floated to the surface, flames, smoke, the small alien child's frightened eyes, and the weight of their consequences pressed on him. Every life saved had consequences, but this one had altered history itself. The Queen did not leave him alone. Her presence was subtle but constant. She would appear at random intervals, watching him as he worked, observing how he treated both humans and aliens around him. She asked questions occasionally, her voice calm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Why did you act without thinking of reward?" she asked once as they walked through the docking bay. Elias shrugged, uncertain how to answer. I didn't think about reward. I just did what needed to be done." The Queen's observation was accurate. Humans often acted differently than any other species he had met in the galaxy. They improvised, they risked themselves for others, and they sometimes succeeded against impossible odds. Yet it often brought chaos in its wake. Word spread quickly among the station personnel. Elias Rowan was not just a human. He was the one who had saved the Queen's daughter, a living connection to the Dominion's future. Some envied him, some feared him, others simply wanted to understand him. The political tension was impossible to ignore. Other species within the station's orbit began sending messages, carefully worded requests to meet with Elias. They hoped to sway the Queen through him or test whether the human could be manipulated. Yet Elias had no interest in politics. He was not clever in the ways diplomats were. He only knew how to act when action mattered most. Still, the pressure mounted. On the second day of the Queen's stay, a series of unusual messages arrived, encrypted warnings from unknown sources. Someone or multiple parties was aware of Elias' presence and considered him a threat to their plans. Assassination attempts, subtle sabotage, and covert intimidation were whispered threats that made the station nervous. Elias didn't panic. He had survived Draxil 9 with a child in his arms. He could survive this too, yet he realized something about himself in these moments. Humans, when faced with danger, did not always rely on the most advanced weapons or technology. They relied on instinct, on improvisation, and on cooperation. It was a simple truth that could be terrifying to others. The first test came sooner than he expected. A power surge hit the station during the Queen's public audience, throwing lights into darkness and alarms into chaos. Alien guards froze momentarily, unsure how to proceed when systems failed. Panic rippled through the crowd, but Elias did not hesitate. He ran toward the control panel, using his hands to reroute power manually. Sparks flew, and he worked under the red glare of emergency lights, ignoring the smoke that stung his eyes. His mind raced through old engineering protocols and battlefield improvisation techniques, every memory of survival and repair converging into a single moment of clarity. Humans around him followed his lead instinctively. One engineer opened the emergency conduit, another rerouted oxygen lines, and a few civilians formed a makeshift barricade to keep curious onlookers at a safe distance. The chaos was intense, but order slowly emerged, not because of strict command, but because of human initiative and the willingness to act without waiting for permission. By the time the system stabilized, the Queen's daughter was safe, her eyes wide as she watched the humans work. She whispered something to her mother, and the Queen's gaze softened slightly. For the first time, she saw humans not just as allies or soldiers, but as creatures capable of extraordinary courage and cleverness born from instinct. The incident passed, but it left an impression on everyone present. Humans, though often underestimated, were capable of improvisation and bravery beyond any protocol or expectation. They could turn chaos into opportunity, danger into survival. And Elias Rowan, in his quiet determination, had demonstrated that truth better than anyone else. Later, in private, the Queen spoke with him. Her tone was softer, almost contemplative. "I have seen many leaders, many warriors, many strategists, but humans are unpredictable. You act from instinct and morality, not only strategy. That is why you are valuable. That is why I will protect you. You are part of the future of my daughter and my people, whether you want it or not." And yet he was all of those things now because a single act of choice had changed everything. In the days that followed, tension grew. Other factions within the station began probing, testing boundaries, and attempting to gauge Elias' reactions. Some tried subtle intimidation, others offered bribes or promised wealth and influence. He refused them all. He had no interest in power, in titles, or in recognition. His only interest remained the simple principle that had guided him all those years ago: do what is right, regardless of reward. This defiance impressed the Queen even more. She began to study him not just as a protector, but as an example of humanity. She asked him to explain human ethics, human decision-making, and human improvisation. He answered honestly, describing small, everyday choices that shaped survival, courage, and morality. "You believe your actions are ordinary," she said one evening, "but that is what makes them extraordinary. Other species act for glory or calculation. Humans act because it is necessary. That is the difference." Humans did not fight for recognition. They did not calculate every move for political gain. They acted when action was needed. That instinct, simple yet profound, had saved lives for centuries, and now it was shaping the future of an alien empire. As he walked through the station's corridors one night, he noticed small gestures from humans around him. Engineers holding doors open, medics assisting alien visitors, civilians quietly ensuring the Queen's daughter was safe. It was instinct, cooperation, and courage, humanity in its purest form. He realized that this simple willingness to act, to take responsibility, to improvise, was not just a trait of the individual, it was a reflection of a species. The Queen's daughter, observing him closely, finally spoke. "I have grown up hearing stories of humans. I have studied your history, your wars, your courage, but seeing you in action, it is different. I understand now why my mother trusts you. I understand why my life was spared because of you. You did what humans do best. You acted when others hesitated. You risked yourself to save someone who could not defend herself. That is not ordinary, that is extraordinary." The Queen's declaration of protection had made him untouchable, yet he moved through the station with quiet humility, repairing machinery, assisting where needed, and showing humans and aliens alike that courage and morality were not dictated by rank or species. They were dictated by choice. Then came the first external test. A distant mining outpost reported an attack by rogue mercenaries, and the Queen's fleet was too far to respond immediately. Elias was asked to advise on human defensive tactics, using his knowledge of improvisation, survival, and field strategy. He suggested simple yet effective measures: rerouting power to shields, organizing human workers to assist in emergency response, and using terrain and station layout to delay attackers. The plan worked flawlessly. The mercenaries were forced to retreat, and casualties were minimal. News of the success spread quickly, reinforcing the Queen's trust in humans and in Elias specifically. The aliens began to see the same truth he had always known. Humans were resilient, creative, and capable of overcoming obstacles that no other species might attempt. By the end of the week, the Queen's observation was clear. Elias Rowan was more than a single act of bravery. He was a symbol of humanity's potential, a reminder that ordinary people acting with courage and morality could shape the course of entire civilizations. And though Elias did not seek recognition, he had become exactly that. And somewhere deep inside, he realized that the life he had saved all those years ago, an alien child alone in a burning landscape, was not just hers. It was humanity's chance to be remembered, not for conquest, not for domination, but for courage, morality, and the quiet strength to act when it mattered most. The calm of Varlon station was shattered before dawn. The first warning came as a low, urgent vibration through the metal floors. Alarms screamed across the corridors, red lights flashing as the entire station went on emergency lockdown. Elias Rowan had learned to respond to such alerts in training, but something about this was different. This was not a drill, not a minor threat. It was an attack. He grabbed his medkit and ran toward the control hub. The Keller Queen and her daughter were already moving under the escort of armored guards. Panic spread quickly among humans and aliens alike, but Elias felt a strange clarity. Years of survival, field operations, and improvisation had prepared him for this. His mind worked fast, calculating the safest routes, the most effective barricades, and the locations where humans and aliens could best protect one another. Explosions rocked the outer docking bays. He saw the flashes of energy weapons cutting through the air, and the sound of impacts on the station's hull made the walls tremble. Mercenaries, rogue pirates, or possibly political enemies, the attackers did not reveal themselves at first. What mattered was survival. "Follow me," Elias shouted, motioning to a group of engineers and civilians. They moved instinctively, trusting his command. They did not ask why, they only followed. The Queen's daughter stumbled as she tried to navigate the chaos, her armor still heavy from earlier ceremonial events. Elias caught her elbow and guided her to a safer corridor. "Stay close. Do exactly what I say and you'll be fine." A human maintenance worker tripped over a fallen cable, and Elias grabbed him, pulling him back to safety. "We move together," he said firmly. Every human instinct he had was in play: protect, guide, improvise. By the time they reached the central hub, the situation had escalated. Attackers had breached the outer docking bays, attempting to cut off the Queen's escape. Alien guards fired coordinated volleys, but their energy weapons were designed for precision, not improvisation. They moved predictably, and that predictability created opportunities for human ingenuity. Elias spotted the problem immediately. The station's power conduits were exposed near the docking bays, and the attackers were using that to disable security measures. He shouted instructions to the engineers: reroute power manually, divert energy to secondary shields, and overload the emergency lights to blind the intruders. Humans scrambled. One engineer climbed into a maintenance shaft, cutting through conduit links and redirecting energy flows. Another sealed airlocks that had been compromised, creating temporary barriers. A civilian team formed a line to direct non-combatants away from danger. Elias moved among them, providing guidance, encouragement, and occasionally pulling someone out of harm's way. Meanwhile, the Queen's daughter observed quietly. She had seen her mother command fleets and armies, but this human improvisation, this willingness to act under chaos, was something she had never witnessed. She whispered to her mother, and the Queen nodded. "Humans, they are more than they appear." There was no time to wait for backup, and the alien guards were struggling to adapt. Humans, however, thrived in this moment. "Block the corridor," Elias shouted. "Stack anything you can, crates, consoles, anything heavy. We hold them off until shields are stable." Sparks flew as makeshift barricades were set into place. Elias stood at the center, directing movement, anticipating weak points, and adjusting tactics as the attackers struck again and again. One intruder tried to rush past the barricade, but Elias' timing was perfect. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and swung it like a lever, knocking the attacker backward just long enough for a human guard to subdue him. Chaos continued, but the defenders' coordinated improvisation held. The Queen, observing from a safe platform, began to understand what she had not grasped in her years of rule. Humans were resilient in a way her empire's soldiers often were not. They adapted, they cooperated, and they acted without waiting for orders. They used what they had wherever they were, and they refused to yield to fear. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. The station's systems flickered under constant attack. Some corridors lost power entirely, forcing defenders to navigate by emergency lights. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and lungs. Yet humans continued. They did not panic. They did not stop. Elias guided a team of engineers to the main reactor. "If they reach this, the station is lost," he said, pointing to the glowing core. He instructed them to reroute coolant lines, isolate vulnerable conduits, and manually stabilize power output. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and every movement risked injury or worse. Yet each instruction was followed with precision. Human instinct combined with discipline and creativity created something the attackers had not anticipated: a coordinated defense born entirely out of improvisation. The Queen's daughter finally spoke. "I always thought humans were reckless," she admitted. "I was wrong. You are extraordinary." He was too focused on the task at hand, but a small smile touched his lips. "We survive," he said simply. "We act, that's what humans do." Where the aliens relied on brute force, humans relied on creativity, observation, and quick thinking. A critical moment came when a section of the station hull began to buckle under heavy bombardment. Explosions rattled the walls, and debris threatened to crush anyone nearby. Elias spotted a maintenance drone, normally used for routine repairs. With no time to retrieve standard tools, he guided the drone using improvised controls, positioning it to hold a weak bulkhead in place just long enough for civilians to evacuate safely. The Queen watched, her expression unreadable. She had fought in wars across the galaxy, commanded fleets, and negotiated alliances that spanned systems. Yet she had never seen such resourcefulness in the face of danger. Elias, an ordinary human by his own admission, had become the linchpin of survival for both humans and Keller alike. By late afternoon, the attackers began to retreat. They had underestimated the station's defenders, particularly the humans, who had transformed chaos into structured resistance. The Queen's fleet, now fully aware of the threat, intercepted the remaining forces, securing the station's perimeter. Silence fell over Varlon Station. Smoke drifted through the corridors, sparks continued to flicker, and the smell of burned metal lingered in the air. Elias leaned against a console, breathing heavily. His clothes were torn, his hands scraped, but he was alive. And so were dozens of others, human and alien alike. The Queen approached him, her guards at a careful distance. "You have done more than I expected," she said quietly. "You did not just survive, you led, you protected, you improvised where others would have failed. No one else would have survived if we hadn't acted together." "I lived because of you," she said simply. "I would be gone without you. I will never forget it." The life he had saved had returned in the form of gratitude, protection, and alliance. Humans, he thought quietly, truly had the power to change the universe, not through weapons or fleets or politics, but through courage, morality, and the instinct to act when it mattered most. The Queen finally spoke to her daughter, her voice carrying authority and admiration. "Your life was spared by a human. Remember this always. Not because of wealth or power, but because humans act when others hesitate. That is their greatest strength." He had not sought recognition, yet here it was, given freely and deserved. As the day ended and calm returned to the station, Elias helped assess the damage. Broken consoles were repaired, barricades dismantled, and civilians were assisted back to their quarters. The Queen and her daughter prepared to depart, but not before one final acknowledgement. "Human," the Queen said, looking directly at him, "know this, you have earned a place in our history. Your courage and humanity will be remembered. You are part of our future, and nothing can change that." As the fleet departed, leaving Varlon Station under human control once more, Elias Rowan finally allowed himself a deep breath. The station, scarred but standing, bore witness to the simple truth he had long understood. Humans did not act for recognition, they did not act for glory, they acted because it was necessary. And when humans acted together, when they combined courage, ingenuity, and morality, they could withstand any storm. For the Queen, her daughter, and the galaxy, that simple truth would be remembered forever. The aftermath of the attack on Varlon Station left the place quiet but scarred. Corridors were charred from energy blasts, consoles flickered in uneven light, and the distant hum of the station's power core reminded everyone that life continued, even after chaos. Humans moved efficiently, repairing damage, assisting aliens, and securing supplies. Elias Rowan walked among them, his hands still scraped, clothes torn, and mind buzzing from the day's events. The Queen of the Keller Dominion stood in the central hall, her presence commanding even in peace. She observed the station quietly, her gaze occasionally drifting to Elias. She did not need to speak. He had already proven his worth, not only in action, but in the unwavering calm and ingenuity he had shown throughout the attack. Her daughter approached him, her expression serious but warm. "You could have stayed hidden," she said softly. "No one would have blamed you, but you didn't. You acted. You protected lives, human and alien alike. That is why we owe you everything." Humans act differently. You act because it is right, not because it benefits you. That is why you are extraordinary. That is why my mother and I will never forget. When she finally addressed the gathered humans and aliens, her voice carried across the room. "Today, the Dominion has witnessed the courage, the ingenuity, and the morality of humanity," she said. "One human, Elias Rowan, has acted in a way that reflects the best of your species. We are not here to conquer or punish, but to recognize what is true. Humans are capable of greatness, not because of technology or numbers, but because of their choices." Humans, though still humble, felt a quiet pride swell in their chests. Their instincts, their courage, and their willingness to act in the face of danger had changed perceptions across the galaxy. The Queen's daughter stepped beside Elia's. "Because of you, my life was saved. Because of you, this station stands. Because of you, humans and Keller have a chance to build a lasting alliance. That is no small thing. This is not just my doing. Any threat against him will be treated as an attack against the Dominion itself. And the human worlds will know that their species is valued not only for its strength, but for its choices, ingenuity, and bravery." A single human had changed the perception of an entire alien empire, and the consequences would ripple through interstellar politics for years. Some envied him, others questioned it, but Elias paid little attention. Recognition was not what he sought. The knowledge that he had acted rightly, that lives had been saved, was enough. In the following days, Elias assisted with repairs and logistics across the station. His experience in the field and quick thinking proved invaluable. He worked alongside Keller engineers, learning their systems and teaching his own methods. Humans and aliens worked together seamlessly, and in the quiet moments the Queen observed, silently impressed by the efficiency, collaboration, and creativity of humanity. The Queen's daughter found time to speak with him privately. "I have studied humans for years," she said. "Your history, your battles, your civilizations. But seeing you in action, seeing you lead without command, seeing you protect lives without hesitation, I understand now why my mother values your species. I understand why my life was spared. It was never just chance. Someone has to act." He had not sought fame, but the truth could not be hidden. Humans were not just survivors or soldiers. They were creative, brave, and morally driven. As the Queen prepared to depart, she held a private council with Elias and her daughter. "We will maintain communication with human leadership," she said. "But more than that, we will remember today. We will remember how humans acted. We will teach future generations about your courage and your choices. Humanity has earned its place among the stars not through conquest, but through morality and action. You, Elias Rowan, exemplify that truth." One human's actions had influenced the perception of an entire species. The choice to act rightly had created consequences he could never have imagined. Before leaving, the Queen's daughter handed him a small token, a delicate insignia from the Dominion, a symbol of life saved and trust earned. "Keep this," she said, "not as a reward, but as a reminder of what your actions meant. To me and to many others, you saved a life, and that life will shape the future." The humans had proven their resilience, their ingenuity, and their courage. The Keller had witnessed firsthand the value of moral action, adaptability, and instinct. In the quiet that followed, Elias returned to his work, repairing systems and assisting with logistics. He no longer felt invisible. He had acted when it mattered most, and that act had echoed through time, affecting lives, alliances, and history itself. He realized that heroism was not always celebrated or rewarded. Sometimes it simply existed in the choices one made when faced with danger, and the ripples of those choices shaped the world in ways no one could predict. As he walked through the corridors of the station, observing humans and aliens working together, he felt a sense of peace. The galaxy was vast, full of conflict and uncertainty, but moments like this, moments of courage, morality, and collaboration, reminded him of the potential of humanity. He remembered the small alien child he had carried on Draxil 9 years ago, and he realized that the life he had saved was not just her life alone. It was the bridge between species, the spark of trust, and the foundation of alliances yet to come. One simple act of humanity had grown into something far greater than he could have imagined. Later, as he stood on the observation deck watching the stars, the Queen's words echoed in his mind. Humans act when others hesitate. They improvise when others fail. They do not wait for recognition. That is their greatest strength. He smiled quietly to himself. He did not need recognition. He had already seen the results of what humanity could do. Bravery, ingenuity, morality, all rolled into one species capable of facing impossible odds and surviving. And in the distance, stars shone like tiny beacons, a galaxy waiting for humans to continue acting, creating, and inspiring. Elias Rowan, once an ordinary medic, now understood that humanity's greatest power was not technology, fleets, or armies. It was the choice to do what is right when it mattered most. The universe would remember humans, not because they sought fame or conquest, but because they had the courage to act when others could not. Elias Rowan returned to his quiet life on the station, but he knew, deep in his heart, that humanity's story was just beginning, and that his simple act of saving a life had helped write the first chapter. He turned away from the observation deck, ready to continue his work, ready to face whatever came next, confident in one undeniable truth: humans could not be underestimated. And somewhere, far across the stars, the Queen and her daughter would always remember the human who had once saved a life, and in doing so, shaped the future.